joined here with Christian Cryder, founder of Lazarus Brewing Co. Christian, thanks so much for joining us
Absolutely.
today. We are based here in Austin, Texas on the east side, where there are breweries popping up all over the place. And I am curious, what is the backstory behind Lazarus and why you came to Austin to say, I want to start this specific company?
That's a big question.
Let's take it.
So we moved here about 5.5 years ago to try to do this. Moved here from Montana. This is basically my third career. So I spent about 14 years in software. And then I was like, I want to do something different. So I moved into ministry, which is different.
Yeah.
And I actually loved ministry. And in the process of doing ministry, I ended up getting involved with brewing and with beer. And our little church partnered with a brewery. And that guy was like, you need to start a brewery. And so that was kind of a long, I'm like, I'm a pastor. And he's like, I don't go to church, but pastors used to do this. And so that really began, I think this is the result of a long journey to figure out what does it look like to have a life where I'm very integrated in the community, even as a person of faith.
Yeah.
So most faith people or churches are actually very disconnected from the communities in which they dwell. So part of this was going, is it possible to actually be in a community in the way that the community can appreciate whether they share any of my convictions or none at all.
And so you moved here to Austin, Texas.
We moved to Austin, Texas, end of 2013. I had no idea how much work this was going to be. So I've never opened a brick and mortar business, never had to raise money to do a business startup. So the learning curve was huge. It's hard to find property here. It took us 2 years to actually find this location. Took us another year to build it out and get it open. Took another year to finish the building that we're sitting in. So it's like, oh, this is more work than I thought it was. But it's been really, really good.
And you can also see bits and pieces of your background as a pastor intertwined in some of the work that you all do with the stained glass just right outside. But how did you come up with the marketing behind it and the branding, which stands out in terms of the breweries here?
So my brother, who was a creative out in the Seattle area, helped me with a lot of the initial design and branding. But a big part of it started really from saying, so this to connect to community. I actually think that one of the ways that we engage in communities, you've got to figure out to be who you really are. Like, in other words, if you can't, if you're presenting, hey, you're presenting a packaged version of yourself and I'm presenting a packaged version of myself, at most what's going to happen is we're going to have these packaged versions interacting. That's not real community.
Yeah.
So in some ways, a big part of we live in a culture that is all about packaging versions. That's what marketing does.
That's right.
And so I think a big part of where people are at is we're starting to realize, like, man, we're starting to realize I've spent so much time interacting with packaged versions of people and things. I really just like a dose of reality. I don't know whether we articulate that or whether we always necessarily want it when it happens. But so back to your question, how do we do this? A big part for me was like, who am I and what's my story?
Yeah.
And how is this actually a part of my story? Because it really is. And I remember talking with my friend Bjorn. I'm like, how do I, if I'm going to open a brewery, I'm a pastor, how do I talk about that? And he's like, dude, just talk about that. That's who you are. That's your story. He's like, don't hide from it. Don't be ashamed of it. But the same time is we're also not trying to, this is not kitsch. We're not doing this as a spin. This is who we are. And so the name Lazarus, I was looking for a name that had a nod both to kind of the Christian roots of brewing, also my own faith journey, an image, death to life. I say this a lot, but I've never met anybody who's like, you know what we need in this world? We need more death. Nobody says
You're
that.
right. You're right.
It's like everybody is like, you know what? No matter what we think, we actually need more life. And so there's a beautiful, our tagline, share life. So the name Lazarus, I think it works on a lot of levels, and it's a strong name. You're not going to forget it, and nobody was using it. I'm like,
that helps.
Brewery name right there. And so that was kind of working out of that. My story, what's the Lazarus story? And then just going, how do we really put ourselves into the space? We approach this saying, we want to try to create the kind of space that we'd like to hang out in all day long. That means, like coffee. It takes a lot of coffee to make beer because you're up early and you're working. And so it's like my wife roasts. It's like, we're going to have a coffee program. And I really like a living room. So we've got like a living room area. And just, again, every single thing. In the afternoons, I like to hang out on the deck. I started growing hops. What got me into brewing was I planted hops in my garden. I had a big pergola overhead. And every morning I would sit out there and just like spend an hour or two reading, thinking, praying, drinking my coffee, looking at hops, going, this is amazing. So it's like, how do we recreate some of those elements that are part of my story in a way that people can appreciate? So we got a pergola. I was like, man, it would be really cool to do a stained glass. Some of the original, when we were planting this church back in Montana for people who'd given up on church, we partnered with Big Sky Brewing. We brewed this beer, called it All Souls Ale, which was a great name for a beer. But the artwork on it was a stained glass kind of imagery. You had St. Peter hoisting a pint. I'm like, I like that. Looks awesome. Like stained glass, All Souls Ale. It was an 11% Imperial Saison. It was a beautiful, so you had church partnering with brewery to do this traditional kind of monastic style beer, but ramped way up. We were like, a Saison is a beer for the common man. It's a farm style beer. What would it look like to actually make that for a king? Okay, we're gonna make it regal, we're gonna make it big, but so anyway, we had that notion of stained glass, and I was just like, I love something about light through glass, the colors. And so as we were moving to this, it's like, how do we have a nod to those little things in our past? What would it look like to move that forward into the space that we're in? So on one hand, we've got stained glass out there that we had designed out of Costa Rica. And on the other hand, we got Bob Marley out on
That's right.
And somehow this all fits because, Bob Marley's on the wall because Bob Marley was on the wall beforehand, before we revitalized this building. But the old Bob was in bad shape. And so rebuilding this building, it was like, well, how do we keep part of the building story as well? Right. So this whole place is really a fusion of stories. The elk on the wall is an elk my dad shot in Montana. My brother turned it into a piece of artwork where it's, kind of armor clad. All of these things are little pieces and nods to our story. And what we're trying to do in the business is weave those things together in a way that feels like it all fits.
Yeah, and I love the concept of having a living room-like setting. Because it is, for someone who may not know what Lazarus is, it feels like home. There's bits and pieces that feel
when
like
we were
home.
first trying to explain this to investors, they're like, a living room?
It's novel. It's novel.
Brewery?
Yeah.
We're like, trust us. And what's been interesting is to have people that don't live here, that know us, who've shown up and visited, and they walk in and they're like, I feel like I just walked into your house. That's actually a really big compliment. In other words, these people know me, they know my house, and they feel like they walked into my house, but it's in this public space. So to me, that says we're doing something right, hospitality space-wise.
I love that. And I want to talk about the Patron Program. Whenever you were raising money, this was pretty something unique, and I had never seen anything like it, which was also really cool. But do you mind, for people who aren't familiar with it, do you mind explaining the concept or the campaign behind it?
So we did early on. We're like, look, we need to do something kind of as a kind of a Kickstarter kind of program. I actually think the value of Kickstarter programs is not primarily in the money; it's what it does community-wise. And we came up with this idea. What would it look like to create a custom glass, like really create a custom glass? Like, let's create a custom glass that nobody's ever seen before. It turns out that's really hard. It
sounds like it, yeah.
Most custom glasses, you're like, and we wanted, there was this, my brother had found this old design way back in like the 1300s, the 1200s in Europe and England, of these mugs, but they were two-handled. And they were called share cups or pass cups. And he was like, dude, look at this old image. I'm like, that's cool. Let's make we need to modernize it a little bit. Let's make like a two-handled cup that embodies the share life. Also kind of looks like a trophy or something. It turns out that's really hard to, you put two ears or two handles on something and it tends to look like Dumbo. And you're like, oh, that doesn't look so
That's
good.
right.
So the iterative process to actually figure out, we want something that looks really, really beautiful. That took a long time. We finally found a stained glass artist out in California that was able to pull it off. But the goal was, we want to create this custom glass and we're actually going to spend some money on it. So like, they're insanely expensive. They're all made by hand. They've got real gold leaf. But the idea is, we're going to sell you one of these mugs for glasses for $1,000. You get free beer for life. And there's actually a little, thinking back to the church roots of all of this, Martin Luther, in kind of leading the Reformation movement against kind of pretty corrupt Catholicism back then, was really preaching against indulgences. And we're like, this is the kind of indulgence Luther would be all over. He'd be like, yeah, pay some money and you get a free beer for the rest of your life. I'm in. So we had this notion of just like, let's have fun with our story, but think about what it might look like. What would it look like to create something where you get a really cool glass, you get a free beer every day for the rest of your life, and we're going to call you patron saints.
You're part of the founding family
That's right.
of Lazarus.
Martin Luther approves, or he would, if he were
Yeah.
here. That was really the notion. And what it's done, it generated some money, yeah. But really what it's done is it's actually created a reason for people to come in 3-4 times a week, 5 times a week, to get their free beer. And then they usually buy another one, or they hang out and have some coffee. But you start to see people connecting. They see other people with a glass. Now, so every Christmas we open it up for 12 days. We do 12 days at Christmas. And each day we sell one more glass. And like this last year, every morning somebody's waiting outside to get the glass. So there's clearly people look at this and go, this isn't, you don't do this if you're just a commercial play, because it doesn't make sense financially. It's too expensive. It's a pain in the ass to build all this, to do all this. But people appreciate it because they're like, this is cool. This feels like you guys, it's real, it's artistic, it's beautiful. I just love, we don't tend to do things this way anymore. The value is not primarily monetary. It's much more of, it's value for our people, it's the community, and it's value for us is we're treating people like friends. So
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it. And let's talk about this space that we're in.
Yeah.
This was a new expansion project that got done in the past couple of months.
Yeah.
And so talk to us a little bit about what Lazarus was versus why did you decide to redevelop this area?
Well, okay, so first of all, when we rented this, we took both buildings. We leased both buildings, and we were originally going to do both buildings at the same time. What we discovered as we started to tear into this building is it was a wreck. So it was a building, it was called the Cool Store. Everybody in the neighborhood loved the Cool Store. They probably didn't realize there were like rats and cockroaches and dead pigeons. And there had been a fire at one point and burned about 60% of the ceiling, like badly burned. And so somebody, however far back in the past, just like painted it over and sheetrocked it. And you're like, you've got to be like the roof sagging. So this building, it was built back in the 30s. As we started to tear into it, we're like, oh man,
There's
a lot of work.
There's a lot, yeah.
And so we realized early on, like let's focus on just getting the main building open. And then business was very good. We had a great response. We're like, okay, we have got to get this building open. We need more brewing capacity, more seating. This is our barrel room. People still called it the Cool Store, and they're like, what are you going to do with the old Cool Store? And so we're like, let's just keep calling it the Cool Store, but let's make the Cool Store cool again, and hopefully in a way that it's going to last for another 100 years. And so what we ended up doing is rebuilding almost all of it. Basically what we've done is been able to recreate an old building, hopefully in a way that honors the story. We kind of said we're going to keep that whole Western Wall and try to recreate it, but make it look like it's done well, like it's done right. We actually hired really great artists to come in and do the Bob Marley mural all over again to keep it original, kind of reimagine the Cool Store logo. It's got the Bienvenidos down the side. So really, it's a nod to what it was, but also saying, but this is who we are now. And so there's this weird fusion where like Lazarus and the Cool Store, somewhere in the middle, they blend. And I think it works. And I think a lot of people rightly appreciated, we need more places like the Cool Store in neighborhoods. And the problem is they don't actually make sense financially.
And why is that?
Because the cheapest thing to do would be to bulldoze this thing and just build something new, but it's not going to have the character.
Right.
So we actually love character, but in order to preserve that, we need to be willing to make some maybe financial decisions that are more costly in the short run, but they're probably the best decisions in the long run. And so, and you got to try to do it in a way. The community is often very distrustful because they've seen a lot of places where it's been botched.
That's right.
And we had some people, I'm sure, that were like, oh my gosh, what are they going to do? I think once we got it done, people were like, we love what you did. And I think that's because hopefully we've navigated well. How do we like try to keep the old character, but also, kind of renew it, make it better?
Well, I love it. And thanks, first of all, for sharing the history behind Lazarus and where we are today. What does the future hold for you all? if you're able to disclose.
Well, I'll say this. First of all, shit breaks all the time. It's like you buy these new tanks and it's like stuff is always breaking. So I'm like, oh, we're done now. It's like, no, we're not done. So we need to add more brewing here, and there's not much room left. We're already beginning to look for new locations. So
here in Austin or outside?
For right now, I will say that there will be a Lazarus. I think there's a very good chance there will be a Lazarus 2 and maybe a Lazarus 3, and those next ones will be here in Austin.
Cool.
And I think, who knows where the future goes after that. But yeah, we're far enough along with this, and the response has been good enough that we're like, we want to continue to do this. And that way I won't get bored. It's like, okay,
That's
let's
right.
do another
That's right.
one.
Well, this is certainly a beautiful space.
Thanks.
And the building, this specific building, really does pay homage to what this place used to be on the east side. And really, you've developed on top of it and kind of kept the culture. And I love the way that it continues to engage the individuals, the people here on the east side, as well as all of Austin. So Christian, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
And for being our guest this week on the Community Builder Series.
Excellent. Thank you so much.